What's up, everybody? We have got a little break in our Hannah Gutierrez coverage for a Lori Vallow Daybell update. She had a hearing recently for a case management conference, basically to see where we are with discovery. Are we going to set a trial date? What's going to happen? The tagline of the video is Lori Vallow asks to skip next hearing for a salacious title. So we're going to watch that very short hearing to see what happens there, why she asks to skip future hearings and whether or not that's appropriate or abnormal, or if there's anything wrong with that at all, or if it is just, in fact, a headline. And then I'm very interested in an interview somebody sent me of a juror from Lori Vallow Daybell's trial. I have not watched that yet. So we're going to be watching that for the first time together. So everybody hit that like button, subscribe to our page if you haven't already, and always let me know in the comments section if you have a question or comment about the video that we break down on the episode. Here we go. There she is. She is in Arizona on charges for the end of her ex-husband's life. And we're going to be following along with this case as long as you guys are interested in it. So let's take a listen to this hearing.
State of Arizona versus Lori Vallow, CR 2021-001704, CR 2022-001242.
Attorney Kay, on behalf of the state, for the record, the Mexican and victim are appearing virtually.
Good morning, Keith Terry and Danae Suki on behalf of Ms. Vallow, who's present appearing in custody.
Thank you, ma'am. Can you tell me your name and date of birth?
Lori Vallow Daybell, 6/26/1973.
All right, this is the time set for a complex case scheduling conference. I've received the complex case joint case management report that indicates discovery is ongoing and a large amount of discovery is about to be disclosed to approximately
88,000 pages of discovery is coming. A lot of discovery, a lot of work still ahead of them. Trial ain't happening anytime soon is what they're saying.
Mr. Terry, do you have any specific discovery issues that you need to bring to my attention today?
Judge, we have yet to receive the bulk of the discovery that's listed in there, so we don't know whether we have issues at this time. So it's going, as your Honor said, it's going to take some time to get through all the discovery. We have yet to receive, I guess, 20 terabytes of discovery, so we will make the court aware if there are any issues.
My intention today was to set another complex case management conference.
By the way, case management conference and a complex case management conference, if you're wondering what the difference is, you probably guessed it. For more complex cases, they can set more time or more case management conferences to deal with the complexity of the case they're trying to manage with this conference.
60 days prior to doing that, though, was there anything from the state that we need to discuss?
Nothing at this time, Your Honor.
Judge, given that we're going to be going through discovery for the next foreseeable months, and we would ask if we could waive Ms. Vallow's presence at the next CCMC.
A very legitimate and normal and appropriate reason to waive her appearance, because they're basically just going to be talking about discovery issues. If she wants to waive her appearance, if she doesn't care to show up, unlike Sarah Boone or other defendants that we've seen want to show up to everything, she doesn't want to show up. And what's interesting is certain cases, I won't mention any names, people condemn the criminal defendant for dressing in a suit and showing up and being very involved and paying attention and looking at his lawyers and, you know, making comments to his lawyers throughout the process about he's way too invested. It's because of his background. You know, he must be guilty because of this or that. But then we look at Lori Vallow, and if she doesn't want to show up, you condemn her for that too. And it's like, listen, some of this stuff is just practical. She doesn't need to show up and sit there. She's already got a life sentence. She ain't going anywhere, whatever happens in this case. So whether she shows up for these hearings or not, legally speaking, it doesn't matter as long as she does waive her appearance at these hearings. Unlike Sarah Boone, if a defendant absolutely wants to be there, maybe Koberger wants to be there too. I don't know. But if they want to be there, we should absolutely allow them to be there. But If they don't want to be there and the state doesn't object, which the state doesn't object here, and there's no reason for them to be there, then usually a judge will grant this.
State opposition on it.
No, Your Honor.
All right, we'll waive your appearance for the next complex case management conference. We're gonna set that for,
So she is allowed to skip it.
April 24th.
I'm talking just this conference, right? Just as they talk through discovery and keep working towards a trial date. I'm not saying she's not going to show up for trial or other big important hearings, but just not this one.
For 8:30 a.m. We'll note that her presence is waived, and not to be transported. At that time, we'll talk about where you're at in going through all that discovery. I imagine, your trial date may not be realistic based on the amount of discovery that we'll discuss at that time. Thank you. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right, we get recessed at that moment. Thank you.
It's very weird to read her facial expressions.
All rise.
I think that's it. Yeah. So that's it for that hearing. Okay. Very weird, very strange to watch her mannerisms and facial expressions. But now we will get to the most interesting part, at least in my opinion, is an interview with a juror. You know how much I love hearing from the jurors. And here is a juror from the Lori Vallow Daybell case. It's only 7 minutes and 45 seconds. So hopefully we get some info here. I don't know what's about to happen because I haven't watched it.
There were hundreds and hundreds of people in that room, and I just thought business as usual at the courthouse. You know, they had trials, needed to be tried, and they needed jurors. No idea it was the Lori Vallow Daybell case.
Tom Evans of Boise, one of the 18 jurors that served on the Lori Vallow trial last spring. In fact, he was juror number 18, and he's now documenting his experience as a juror in a new book. I had the chance to sit down with Evans to talk about.
That's always a little side eye to me that he's documenting his experience in a book. We wade into dangerous waters here, folks.
The powerful impact this trial had on him and how it is still impacting him today. Tom Evans got a jury summons in March of 2023.
By the time I actually got called into court, Lori was there. So then I knew for sure, because I did recognize her. So I knew what we were.
He did recognize her, which again, some people are going to say he should have been struck. Just recognizing somebody or having heard of the case or even having seen a news clip does not automatically disqualify you, especially in a small town. But if you had already made up your mind, or you could not be fair and impartial, if you could not make the decision based on just what is presented in front of you from evidence, testimony, and what happens in that courtroom, then you can't be a juror. So knowing who she is doesn't disqualify him automatically.
So as you went through the process and they kept whittling down the jurors, you were probably realizing that, hey, I'm getting closer and closer to being picked here.
I did, and I could see it on other people's faces too. It was just kind of dawning on us that we're on the jury. There was people crying and a lot of shock. The way it worked was there were 18, 6 alternates, but we wouldn't know who the alternates were until the trial ended.
Evans says he didn't know many details about the Lori Vallow case.
Not knowing anything about her going into this made it hard for me, and I was really trying to just keep up.
You see how he said made it hard for him? So most people, when they go into a case, they know nothing about the defendant. It is hard for them to catch up and figure out what's going on. So the norm is difficult for jurors, period.
With the testimony and everything that was going on, there just, I think, came a time when it just seemed like, with all of the evidence put together, that she was definitely guilty. She would just sit with her kind of her head to the side and her wavy hair kind of covering her face.
She was just kind of sitting there with her head to the side and her wavy hair that was covering her face. Again, it seems like he was putting a negative connotation on the way that she presented or appeared at trial, but he did say all the evidence, when you put it together, she was definitely guilty.
And just kind of a sad look on her face. A few times did I actually see her react. When they showed the pictures of the exhumed bodies. And of course, you know, she was really slumped down and looking away the whole time with her head down. The other time I saw her was when one of the witnesses was testifying, and she was just staring daggers. Lori was staring daggers at her in a really kind of just a intense way.
So we always talk about it, whether people like it or not. The jurors are watching the defendants. They're watching the parties. If it's a civil case, they're watching the plaintiffs, they're watching the defendants. So when we get to watch the stream together and we get to see the defendant or we get to see the plaintiff, it's important because that can make a difference. If they are doing something, that can make a difference in the jury's mind. It's not evidence, but it is something the jury's watching in the courtroom that could affect their deliberations, their feelings, their thoughts, and maybe even their vote in the case.
It looked like she was kind of trying to stare her down and maybe
Actually, he
manipulate.
thought she was trying to stare down a witness. He's starting to form what he thinks of Lori Vallow in his head, if that's what you're thinking when you're watching her stare daggers at a witness, as he said.
How did you feel about her son's testimony?
It was really hard. There was a lot of testimony that was just really hard. These were the actual people. They were victims of her also.
You had a front row seat to all of this pain.
Yeah, exactly. All the pain.
Evans says the worst part was the day the jury was exposed to the autopsy photos of Lori's children, Tylee and JJ.
Obviously, you can't be really prepared for that. And it was just really hard seeing those pictures. I felt like I had to look. It was my job. But I told myself ahead of time, I'm going to take the quickest glance possible. But every one of those images is burned into my mind. It'll never go away.
What did you think about the law enforcement involved in their dedication?
I'm glad you asked me that. It made me proud of the state that I live in to see the system working so well and the people within the system doing their jobs, the FBI, the detectives.
And it's interesting because some of the victims and their families were thinking that justice was too delayed and there were issues with the process, but he is saying he's proud of where he lives at. This is how the system is supposed to work. And ultimately, they did get justice. She did get convicted. They got the person or one of the people responsible for what happened to their family members.
Rexburg Police, the prosecution team, everybody, very impressive. And the defense team, those guys, I think they gave her due process. I think that's all they could do. I don't think they had much of a defense.
Then
the defense team gave her due process. I think that's all they could do. They didn't have much of a defense. That's not exactly a glowing report of what her defense attorneys did in this case, right? I mean, anytime they say, and if you remember back, we thought it was very weird. If you go back to the Lori Vallow Daybell playlist, where this one is probably saved, and you listen to opening or you listening to closing or some of the clips that I talked about or spoke about when I was breaking it down. Well, by the way, we couldn't watch this trial, but we heard there were bits and pieces we could hear. It was so weird, kind of like Letitia Stock, where they're like, listen, they're like apologizing for representing and even having to make an argument for this person. And the jury got it. They were like, we get it, pal. Not much you could say. She's screwed, but she's got a constitutional right. And you guys, you know, gave it the old college try.
And after weeks of being in that courtroom day after day, it was time to deliberate. 6 of the jurors had to go. Only 12 would decide Lori's fate.
The trial ended, and almost immediately they're pulling numbers out of the hat.
Evans says his number 18, was called as an alternate.
And at that moment, I was shocked. I was hurt.
I didn't even realize this guy was an alternate the whole time. This guy's an alternate. He wasn't even in there deliberating. But it seems like he was on the same page as the rest of the jury that did deliberate.
It felt unfair. I did not want my number called at that point. I wanted to be part of deliberations after having gone through all of that.
He had to go home and wait for the verdict. How did you hear about it? Did you get to go back to the courtroom and watch, or did you have to hear about it like the rest of us from home?
No, I arranged with the jury administrator to be able to be there and actually have a seat in that courtroom. They offered that to us. I took them up on it. I wasn't going to miss that.
Tom says he agreed with the jury's verdict of guilty on all counts. He also went to Fremont County for her sentencing in July. Vallow was sentenced to 5.
Well, now that he's writing the book, he's got to go to everything, right? He's got to go to sentencing. He's probably going to show up in Arizona and see what happens in that case too. It's always a little weird to me. Just somebody in the process that works in this process. It's very weird.
consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for her involvement in the murders of her children and Tammy Daybell.
The first time JJ visited me after he passed away,
First time I'd ever heard her speak in person.
and he said to me, "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom."
I think in some sense she's insane. She has to be. But then she's perfectly capable of manipulating and making things work the way she wants them to work. So in that sense, she's not insane.
So temporary insanity defense maybe would have been more successful if the jury was believing that she was insane, and they had a lot of comments like this to mental health professionals. We know there were competency issues. Why didn't they go with that defense? Maybe they didn't have the medical backing for it. Maybe she wouldn't allow it. Who knows?
While he was in eastern Idaho, he drove to Chad Daybell's house in Rexburg. He said he had to see it in person.
I could see where Tylee and JJ had been buried.
I hope that he means after the trial, because they're not allowed to do that during the trial. I hope he means after the trial.
Larry and Kay Woodcock, JJ's grandparents, were there.
They came up to us and thanked us, hugged us,
Okay, so
told us, and they
post-trial.
were so warm. And that was a moment for me that really meant a lot to me. It really kind of made me feel better about the whole thing.
Post-trial things are different. I get it. You've convicted this person. You think all the evidence points to X. That is the truth. These people are victims. You feel for them. They appreciate you doing your duty, taking time out of your life, doing your job. So I get it. They're jurors. They're not judges. They're not lawyers. So I don't personally have a problem with this. If you guys do, let me know. I appreciate him sharing it. And I think that that's exactly what I would expect the Woodcocks to do based on everything I've seen in the news with how they've handled this process.
They were comforting me. I walked away feeling like I can't just walk away from this and go back to my life. What am I going to do? And it came to me that there was a story to be told. And I thought, I'm not a writer, but I'm going to write a book. That's what I'm going to do.
Evan's book is called Money, Power, and Sex, the Lori Vallow Daybell Trial by juror number 18.
Prosecuting attorney, her opening statement started out with money, power, and sex.
I mean, that's got to make you feel good as a lawyer that your theme and your title makes it into a book by one of the jurors after. Again, we liked is a bad word. We thought it was a good theme and a really strong opening statement from that prosecutor. If you go back and watch the immediate reaction I did right after opening statements. So it doesn't surprise me that they held on to this. And again, this also tells you just psychologically, right? He doesn't have to say this, but his mind started to be made up, and probably some of the other jurors, from opening statements. We talk about how important jury selection and opening statements are, and that lawyers win more trials in opening statements than they do with closing statements. That's what the research shows. And her opening statement, I think, was very impactful in starting the ball rolling down to an eventual victory for the prosecution, for justice.
And that was some of the first words I heard sitting in that trial as a juror. And it just kind of resonated with me, I guess. I wanted to tell the story about the police and the prosecution and the court system, my experience as a juror and the trial, Lori and Chad's past. I talk a lot about Tylee and JJ and Charles and Tammy. I talk a lot about preppers, fundamentalist offshoots, and other cults.
Tom wears a wristband and has a picture of JJ and Tylee on the wall above his computer to keep him focused on the victims.
When I'm doing my research and I'm writing, sometimes it gets pretty dark. I see their faces and it kind of inspires me, and I feel like they're telling me that I can tell their story.
He says he just can't walk away from this case. Not yet.
I think
And this stuff does happen, and people always ask, are there people they can talk to? And there are. And they're also encouraged to seek help on their own if they feel like they need it. And I mean, it feels like this guy was pretty impacted by this. Probably some of the other jurors were as well.
the idea is you go serve your time and then you go right back to your life. That's 100% what I was expecting to do. But when I walked out of that courtroom, there was no way that was going to happen.
I want to thank Tom for sharing his story with me, and you will be able to buy Evan's book on Amazon, but not until after Chad Daybell's trial wraps up. He agreed with prosecutors and police not to publish it until that trial is over. Chad's trial is expected to start April 1st for now.
But they're already trying to delay it. So that's interesting. And that, I respect him for that. that he's going to wait till after the trial. Now the Netflix stuff has already come out, and I wish they would have agreed with that and waited until it was a more appropriate time to not affect the trial. So I appreciate that he's doing that. At least let's give him props for that.
Evans says he also plans to write a second book about Chad Daybell's trial, and he's decided to donate all the proceeds of his books to Hope House in Marsing, a home for children in need.
This is the way to do it, folks. This guy is doing it the right way. It still makes me side-eye. It's still a little cringy for me to think about, a juror or a court clerk or anybody writing a book on stuff like this. But if you're going to do it, you respect everyone's timing. You respect and focus on the victims. You don't let it affect the other cases negatively or come out in the public and affect the verdict that has already been rendered. And you donate all the proceeds to a good cause that actually helps future or to create a better future for some potential victims or people that have already been victimized. So I will give this dude props. It's a nice twist there at the end that it's not for money or power for himself.
He says he wants something good to come out of this whole experience, and Hope House just made sense for him. For more on his story, go to our website.
All right. So that was interesting. That was really interesting. I didn't know how I was going to feel about it when we first started watching it. So Lori Vallow update in other cases is there's going to be delays. It seems like we may have some delays in Daybell's case as well. But first juror that I've seen speak out, we've heard from him. No surprises. Really sad case. Seems like he's dealing with it and coping with it in his own way. But let me know what you guys think about it overall. What are your thoughts on how he handled the situation on that trial? Appreciate you guys all joining me. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.